In the Pistis Sophia, Mary Magdalene asks Jesus, "Master, why do those who carry the light wake in the darkest hour?" And Jesus answers with something the Church removed from every canonical gospel. The Archons know when the veil is thinnest. Between the 3rd and 4th hour of night, when human consciousness drops deepest, that is when they feed. They harvest the energy of the spiritually awake because your light burns brighter, and at 3 a.m. your defences are lowest. If you're watching this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You wake at 3 a.m., not 2:47, not 3:23, exactly 3 a.m. And there's a specific feeling, pressure in the room, a sense something just left, or something is still watching. Here's what the Pistis Sophia reveals. At 3 a.m., the boundary between physical and archonic realms becomes permeable. Your consciousness generates a frequency they feed on, but chosen ones generate higher quality frequency, your premium fuel, and they time their feeding to when you're most vulnerable. Place your hand on your solar plexus right now. That's where they attach. When you wake at 3 a.m. with that hollow feeling in your gut, that's not anxiety. That's the sensation of something detaching after feeding. Jesus didn't tell them to pray. He gave them a 3-step protocol that transforms you from prey into a closed system they cannot penetrate. First step, the moment your eyes open at 3 a.m., there's a 7-second window where they're still attached. If you know what to do, you reverse the polarity. Instead of them taking your energy, you draw from their attempt. If you've woken at 3 a.m., comment "I wake at the hour" below. Second step, what Jesus called the breath that severs. 4 counts in, hold for 7, out for 8. But it's where you direct this breath, into your solar plexus. When you exhale, you're releasing a frequency that cuts their attachment like a blade. Third step, the activation phrase. 3 words in Aramaic that collapse the portal they use to reach you. Once collapsed, they can't use it again unless you rebuild it through fear or trauma. They don't wake you to torment you. They wake you because the feeding isn't complete. They need you conscious to generate fear, awake to create anxiety. The waking is the feeding. Tonight you're learning the complete protocol, the 7-second reversal, the breath that severs, the 3 Aramaic words, and how to turn their feeding hour into your reclamation hour. Let's begin with the history, because understanding why this practice was removed from mainstream Christianity will help you understand why it works. The practice I'm about to teach you has its roots in 3 distinct but interconnected traditions. The Desert Fathers of 3rd, 5th century Egypt and Syria, the Gnostic communities that produced texts like the Nag Hammadi library, and the Eastern Orthodox tradition of hesychasm that preserved these techniques in modified form. In 270 CE, a wealthy Egyptian named Anthony sold everything he owned and walked into the desert. This is the historical Anthony of Egypt, not the mythologized saint. According to Athanasius's Life of Anthony, written around 360 CE, Anthony specifically chose to pray during the watches of the night and described being attacked by demons during these periods. But here's what Athanasius's hagiography obscures. Anthony wasn't just being attacked, he was training. We know this because of Evagrius Ponticus, who studied with disciples of Anthony and wrote the first systematic manual of what we'd now call contemplative psychology. Evagrius was born in 345 CE, served as a deacon in Constantinople, then fled to the Egyptian desert in 383 CE after a scandal. He died in 399 CE, leaving behind 3 crucial texts, the Practicos, the Gnostikos, and the Kephalaia Gnostica. In the Practicos, Evagrius describes 8 logismoi, thought patterns that he classified systematically. He didn't call them sins, he called them thoughts, and he described them with the precision of a cognitive scientist. He wrote, "The demon of acedia, also called the noonday demon, is the most oppressive of all demons. He attacks the monk about the 4th hour and besieges his soul until the 8th hour. First of all, he makes the sun appear sluggish and immobile, as if the day had 50 hours. Then he makes the monk constantly look at the windows and forces him to step out of his cell and to gaze at the sun to see how far it still is from the 9th hour. The 4th hour in monastic timekeeping, which began at sunset, corresponds to approximately 3 a.m. The 8th hour is approximately 7 a.m. Evagrius is describing a specific cognitive state that occurs during the circadian nadir, the lowest point in the 24-hour cortisol rhythm. Modern sleep research confirms this. The period from 2-4 a.m. is when core body temperature is lowest, melatonin peaks, and the brain is most vulnerable to what's called nocturnal rumination. But Evagrius wasn't just observing this. He developed a specific counter-protocol. In the same text, he writes, "Against the demon who makes us dull and sleepy, one must oppose him by prayer and psalmody, and by not giving in to sleep. Against the thoughts that prompt us, one must speak back to them from the scriptures." This sounds like generic religious advice. It's not. The Greek word Evagrius uses for prayer is prosouche, which specifically means directed, focused attention, not petitionary prayer. The word for psalmody is psalmodia, which in desert practice meant rhythmic breathing synchronized with text recitation, creating what modern respiratory physiology would call coherent breathing at about 5 to 6 breaths per minute. And speaking back from the scriptures wasn't about quoting Bible verses. It was about using memorized text as an anchor for attention, exactly what modern mindfulness practice calls noting or labeling. Evagrius was teaching a complete neurocognitive protocol disguised as religious practice. Now let's talk about why this got suppressed. In 553 CE, the Fifth Ecumenical Council in Constantinople condemned Evagrius posthumously. His works were banned. Why? Because he was too explicitly Gnostic in his cosmology. He taught that souls pre-existed before physical birth, that matter was a result of a cosmic fall, and most dangerously, that direct experience of the divine was accessible through technique rather than through church sacraments. The church couldn't allow that. Technique means people don't need priests, so they kept his practices but removed his explanations. The prayer schedules remained, monks still woke at 3 a.m. for vigils, but the underlying methodology was lost. What survived was the schedule without the technology, except in one place, Eastern Orthodoxy, specifically in what became known as hesychasm. The Philokalia, compiled between the 4th and 15th centuries, preserves fragments of this tradition. In Volume 1, Nikitas Stithirtos, writing in the 11th century, describes the guarding of the intellect with remarkable specificity. When you are troubled by the demons at night, and your mind is stirred up by thoughts, immediately rise from your bed and stand in prayer. Then sit down again and carefully scrutinize the thoughts that come to you, examining whence each comes. Those from God will be recognized by their gentleness and composure, those from the demons by their violence and confusion. This is a diagnostic protocol. Nikitas is teaching practitioners to use the 3 a.m. awakening as an opportunity for what modern psychology would call metacognitive therapy, learning to observe thought patterns without identification. The Gnostic texts are even more explicit about why this matters. In the Apocryphon of John, one of the Nag Hammadi texts dating to around 180 CE, there's a cosmology that describes the Archons, rulers or authorities, as entities that feed on human emotions and thoughts. The text states, the Archons brought them down into darkness, and they made a counterfeit spirit resembling the spirit which had descended. And they bound them with measures and times and moments. And the Archons took counsel with one another and said, "Come, let us cause a deep sleep to fall upon Adam." You can dismiss this as mythology, or you can read it as pre-scientific psychology, describing what modern neuroscience confirms. The brain's default mode network generates a constant stream of self-referential, often negative thought patterns, patterns that are particularly active during REM sleep and the transitional states around it. The Gnostic texts describe these thought forms as having agency, as feeding on human attention. Modern attention economy researchers like Tristan Harris describe social media algorithms in exactly the same terms, engineered systems that harvest human attention and emotional energy. The technique is the same whether you call them archons or algorithms. You learn to recognize these patterns, withdraw your attention from them, and redirect your focus toward what the texts call remembrance, a state of present moment awareness that starves these patterns of the attention they require to persist. This is what the early Christians were doing at 3 a.m. The common misconception is that these practices were about fighting demons or resisting temptation through willpower. That's not what the texts describe. They describe a process of observation, recognition, and redirection. The practice was forgotten, not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. It made practitioners independent of religious authority. When you can directly access expanded states of consciousness through technique, you don't need mediation. You don't need the church. So the church preserved the appearance of the practice, the prayer schedules, the liturgies, the monastic routines, but removed the core technology. What survived in monasteries was the shell. What we're recovering is the kernel. Now let me show you exactly how it works. The foundation of this practice is what I call the 3 a.m. threshold protocol. It consists of 4 integrated components: postural alignment, respiratory regulation, attentional anchoring, and thought discrimination. I'll walk you through each component in detail, then show you how they integrate into a single practice. When you wake at 3 a.m., your first instinct is either to try to force yourself back to sleep or to get up and distract yourself. Both of these responses waste the opportunity. Instead, you're going to assume what the Desert Fathers called the prayer posture, and what Eastern traditions call stable sitting. Sit up in bed with your back against the headboard or wall. If you don't have a headboard, sit on the edge of the bed with your feet flat on the floor. The key is that your spine must be vertical. Not rigidly straight, allow the natural curves, but vertically aligned so that your head balances effortlessly on top of your spine. Why does this matter? Because when you're lying down, your brain interprets this as a sleep signal. Melatonin remains elevated. Your brainstem activates sleep-promoting neurons, and you're fighting against millions of years of mammalian evolution that says horizontal equals rest. But when you sit vertically with your spine aligned, something specific happens neurologically. You activate the ascending reticular activating system, the AS, which is the network of neurons responsible for wakefulness and attention. You're sending a signal to your brainstem. We're awake and alert, but we're not in threat mode. This is crucial. If you stand up and start walking around, you activate your sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight. Your cortisol spikes, your body temperature rises, and you've lost the theta-dominant brainwave state that makes this hour so valuable. Sitting vertically keeps you in what researchers call quiet wakefulness, alert but not aroused, awake but not activated. Place your hands in one of 2 positions, either palms down on your thighs or right hand over left in your lap with thumbs touching lightly. The Desert Fathers used both. The palms down position is more grounding. Use this if you feel anxious or scattered. The hand in lap position is more concentrative. Use this if you feel dull or sleepy. Close your eyes or keep them open with a soft downward gaze. The texts vary on this. Evagrius recommended eyes open so that sleep does not overtake you, but later Hesychast teachers recommended eyes closed to guard the gates of perception. Experiment and see what works for you. The key is this: you're creating a posture that is stable enough to maintain for 20-40 minutes, alert enough to prevent sleep but relaxed enough that you're not creating unnecessary tension. This is where the practice becomes technical and where most modern adaptations go wrong. The Desert Fathers practiced something they called prayer of the heart, which involved synchronizing breath with the repetition of a short phrase, usually, "Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me." But the phrase itself was secondary. What mattered was the breathing pattern it created. When you recite a phrase of 8-10 syllables synchronized with your breath, inhaling for the first half, exhaling for the second half, you create a breathing rate of approximately 5 to 6 breaths per minute. This is called coherent breathing in modern respiratory physiology, and it has specific measurable effects. At 5 to 6 breaths per minute, your breathing synchronizes with your heart rate variability, the natural fluctuation in time between heartbeats. Your heart rate increases slightly on the inhale and decreases on the exhale, and at this specific breathing rate, these oscillations become maximally coherent. Why does this matter? Because heart rate variability is directly connected to vagal tone, the activity of your vagus nerve, which regulates the parasympathetic nervous system. High vagal tone is associated with emotional regulation, stress resilience, and what researchers call cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift between different modes of thinking. The Desert Fathers didn't know about the vagus nerve. They just knew that this breathing pattern produced a state they called nepsis, watchful calm. Here's the specific technique. Breathe in slowly through your nose for a count of 5 to 6 seconds. Let your belly expand, then your ribcage, then your upper chest. This is called 3-part breathing or yogic breathing. Pause briefly at the top of the inhale, just a moment, no strain. Exhale slowly through your nose for a count of 5 to 6 seconds. Let your upper chest deflate first, then your ribcage, then your belly. Pause briefly at the bottom of the exhale, repeat. If you want to use a phrase, use something simple. The traditional, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, works, but so does I am here now, or breathing in, breathing out, or even just counting. The phrase is a tool for pacing, not a magic incantation. Do this for at least 2-3 minutes before moving to the next component. You're establishing a physiological baseline, a state of calm alertness that will make the attentional work possible. Now we get to the core of the practice, and here's where the Desert Father's instructions become remarkably precise. Evagrius wrote, "The demon of acedia suggests concerns for one's relatives, one's former life, and a long life that remains. He represents the hardness of ascetic labour, and, as they say, the belly has no ears. He brings to mind other monks who have fallen away. He suggests other places where one might more easily gain salvation. He adds that to please God is not a matter of being in one place or another. This is a perfect description of what cognitive psychology calls mind-wandering, or task-unrelated thought. Evagrius is describing the default mode network's activity, the brain's tendency to generate self-referential thoughts, future projections, past memories, and social comparisons. And he's describing it as demonic not because he's superstitious, but because he's recognized something crucial. These thought patterns feel compelling, feel urgent, feel important, but they're actually draining your energy and keeping you trapped in repetitive cycles. The technique he teaches is called guarding the intellect or watchfulness of the new. Once your breathing is stable, bring your attention to the sensations of breathing, not the concept of breathing, not the visualization of breathing, but the actual felt sensations, the cool air at your nostrils on the inhale, the warm air on the exhale, the subtle movement of your belly, the expansion of your ribs. This is your anchor. This is what the texts call the remembrance, the constant return to present moment sensory experience. Within 30 seconds, maybe less, you'll notice that your attention has wandered. You'll be thinking about something, what you need to do tomorrow, a conversation you had yesterday, an imagined future scenario, a memory, a plan, a worry, a fantasy. This is not a failure. This is the practice. Evagrius wrote, "The contemplative must always be ready for the struggle with the thoughts that will assault him. The assault isn't the appearance of thoughts. The assault is the moment when you believe them, identify with them, and get pulled into their narrative. The practice is this. The moment you notice you've been thinking, and this noticing is crucial, this is the moment of awareness. You simply label what kind of thought it was, and return your attention to the breath. The labeling is important. This is what Evagrius meant by speaking back from the scriptures. He wasn't saying to quote Bible verses at your thoughts. He was saying to name them, to categorize them, to see them clearly for what they are. Evagrius classified 8 types of thoughts: gluttony, lust, avarice, sadness, anger, acedia, vainglory, and pride. These aren't sins in this context. They're categories of mental patterns. You can use his categories, or you can use simpler modern labels: planning, remembering, worrying, fantasizing, judging, comparing. The label doesn't matter as much as the act of labeling. When you name a thought, that's a planning thought, or that's a worry thought, you create what psychologists call cognitive diffusion. You separate yourself from the thought. You recognize it as a mental event rather than as reality. Then you return to the breath. This is the complete practice. Anchor attention on breath. Notice when attention wanders. Label the thought, return to breath. Repeat for 20-40 minutes. It sounds simple. It's profoundly difficult, especially at 3 a.m. when your prefrontal cortex is still sleepy and your default mode network is hyperactive. But this difficulty is exactly why this hour is so valuable. After you've been practicing the anchoring for 10-15 minutes, you'll start to notice something. Not all thoughts are the same. Some thoughts arise with a grabbing, urgent, compulsive quality. They demand attention. They create agitation in your body, tension, contraction, a subtle sense of anxiety or craving. These are what the Gnostics called archontic thoughts, and what Evagrius called demonic thoughts. Other thoughts arise more gently. They appear, linger, and dissolve without creating agitation. They might be insights, creative ideas, or moments of clarity. These are what the texts call thoughts from the new, or divine thoughts. The difference isn't in the content, it's in the quality. An archontic thought might be something positive, a fantasy about success, a pleasant memory, but it has a compulsive, draining quality. It pulls you out of the present moment and into a mental story that creates subtle agitation. A thought from the nous might be something challenging, a difficult truth about yourself, a recognition of something you need to change, but it arises with clarity, without agitation, without the hooked quality. The practice now becomes more subtle. You're learning to discriminate between these two types of thoughts, not by their content, but by their phenomenology, how they feel, how they arise, what they do to your attention. This is what the texts mean by testing the spirits, or discernment of spirits. It's not mystical, it's phenomenological precision. When an archontic thought arises, grabbing, urgent, agitating, you recognize it, label it, and deliberately withdraw your attention. You don't fight it, you don't suppress it, you just stop feeding it with your attention. This is what the texts mean by starving the demons. When a thought from the nous arises, you allow it space. You observe it with gentle attention. Often these thoughts will unfold into genuine insights or creative ideas. You can choose to follow these thoughts for a moment, to see where they lead, and then return to the breath. This discrimination takes practice. At first, you'll misidentify thoughts. You'll feed archontic thoughts thinking they're important. You'll dismiss thoughts from the nous thinking they're distractions. But over weeks and months, your discernment becomes more refined. You develop what the text calls spiritual perception, the ability to instantly recognize the quality of a thought and respond appropriately. Let me summarize this as a step-by-step protocol you can follow. When you wake at 3 a.m., sit up with your spine vertical, either against a headboard or on the edge of the bed. Place your hands either palms down on your thighs or right over left in your lap. Begin coherent breathing. 5-6 seconds inhale, brief pause, 5-6 seconds exhale, brief pause. Continue for 2-3 minutes. Anchor your attention on the sensations of breathing. When you notice your attention has wandered, label the type of thought, planning, worrying, remembering, whatever it is. Return your attention to the breath. After 10-15 minutes, begin to notice the quality of thoughts, grabbing and agitating versus gentle and clear. Deliberately withdraw attention from archontic thoughts. Allow space for thoughts from the nous. Continue for 20-40 minutes total. When you're ready to return to sleep, lie back down and allow yourself to drift off naturally. Or, if you feel complete, begin your day. That's the foundation. Now let me show you the variations and adaptations. The core protocol I just described is what I call the standard practice, suitable for people with some meditation experience. But there are 3 levels of adaptation depending on your experience and what you're encountering. If you're new to meditation, or if 20-40 minutes feels overwhelming at 3 a.m., start here. When you wake, sit up and do just 2 minutes of coherent breathing. That's it. Focus only on the breath count. 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. Use your fingers to count if needed. After 2 minutes, if you feel calm and alert, continue for 3 more minutes with simple breath awareness. If you feel agitated or sleepy, lie back down. The goal at this level isn't deep practice. It's building the habit of responding to the 3 a.m. awakening with awareness rather than reaction. You're training yourself to sit up, breathe, and observe rather than immediately trying to force sleep or distracting yourself. Do this for at least 2 weeks before progressing. You're establishing a neurological pattern, a conditioned response where the 3 a.m. awakening becomes a cue for the sitting practice rather than a source of frustration. Once the 5-minute practice feels stable, extend to 15 to 20 minutes and add the thought labeling component. Use a timer if needed. Set it for 15 minutes so you're not wondering how long you've been sitting. Use a gentle sound, not a jarring alarm. At this level, you're working primarily with the labeling practice. Your goal is to catch the moment of mind wandering as quickly as possible, ideally within 3-5 seconds of the thought arising. Many practitioners at this level report that the first 5-10 minutes are chaotic. Thought after thought, barely able to maintain attention on the breath for more than a few seconds. This is normal. This is exactly what Evagrius described as the siege. Push through. The mind is like a snow globe that's been shaken. It takes time for the thoughts to settle. Around the 10-minute mark, most practitioners experience a shift. thoughts begin to slow down, the space between thoughts widens, and moments of genuine stillness emerge. This is what you're aiming for, those moments of gap, of silence, of presence. After 2-3 months of consistent practice, you can work with what the Hesychast tradition calls unceasing prayer, or what we might call continuous watchfulness. At this level, the 3 a.m. practice becomes an anchor point in a 24-hour continuum of awareness. During your regular day, you practice micro moments of the same breath awareness and thought labeling. When you're waiting in line, sitting at a red light between tasks, any moment of transition, you drop into 3-5 conscious breaths with the same quality of attention you bring to the 3 a.m. practice. These micro moments train your nervous system to access the state more quickly and deeply. When you wake at 3 a.m., your system already knows this state. It's not starting from scratch, it's returning to familiar territory. At this level, you can also experiment with what the texts call the night watch, deliberately setting an alarm for 3 a.m. even if you're not waking naturally, and doing the practice as an intentional discipline. The Desert Fathers did this. They didn't wait for insomnia, they engineered their sleep schedule around the practice. Modern sleep science would call this biphasic sleep, or segmented sleep, the pattern where you sleep 3-4 hours, wake for 1-2 hours, then sleep another 3-4 hours. Historical research by Roger E. Kirch at Virginia Tech has shown that this was the dominant sleep pattern in pre-industrial societies. If you want to try this, go to sleep around 9-10 p.m., set an alarm for 2:30 a.m., practice for 30-60 minutes, return to sleep around 3:34 a.m., and sleep until 7-8 a.m. This gives you 2 complete sleep cycles before the practice, a period of theta-dominant wakefulness during the practice, and another 1-2 sleep cycles after. Many advanced practitioners report that this schedule, after an adjustment period of 2-3 weeks, actually improves sleep quality and daytime alertness compared to consolidated 8-hour sleep. But this is advanced. Don't start here, build the foundation first. If sitting upright is painful or impossible due to injury or disability, you can practice lying on your back with a pillow under your knees and another under your head. Enough elevation that you're not in full sleep position. The key is to find a position that maintains alertness without creating pain or strain. Some practitioners use what's called corpse pose, or savasana, lying flat on the floor rather than in bed. The hardness of the floor keeps you from drifting into sleep, and the horizontal position reduces the postural challenge. Experiment and find what works for your body. Some practitioners, especially in the first few weeks, encounter intense emotions during the 3 a.m. practice. Anxiety, sadness, anger, or what the texts call the desert, or the dark night. If this happens, modify the practice to be more grounding. Instead of closing your eyes, keep them open with a soft gaze at a fixed point. Instead of breath-only focus, use a more sensory-rich anchor. The feeling of your hands on your thighs, the sensation of your back against the wall, the sounds in your environment. If emotions become overwhelming, stand up, walk slowly for a few minutes, then return to sitting. The texts are clear about this. The practice will surface what's been suppressed. Evagrius called it bringing the hidden things to light. Modern trauma-informed meditation teaching calls it the surfacing of unprocessed material. This isn't a sign you're doing it wrong, it's a sign you're doing it right. But you need to work at the edge of your capacity, not beyond it. If intense emotional or psychological material consistently arises, consider working with a therapist who understands contemplative practice. The traditional texts assumed you were in a monastic community with an experienced spiritual director. Most of us don't have that. A skilled therapist can serve a similar function. Now let's look at why this practice works from both ancient and modern frameworks. Why does sitting at 3 a.m. and watching your breath do anything meaningful? Let's examine this from 3 perspectives: neuroscience, chronobiology, and the phenomenology of consciousness. Your brain operates in different states characterized by different patterns of electrical activity. Brain waves. These are measured in hertz, cycles per second. Beta waves at 13 to 30 hertz represent normal waking consciousness, focused attention, problem solving. Alpha at 8 to 13 hertz is relaxed awareness, light meditation, the state between waking and sleeping. Theta at 4-8 hertz is deep meditation, REM sleep, hypnagogic states, access to unconscious material. Delta at 0.54 Hz is deep, dreamless sleep, healing, regeneration. During consolidated sleep, your brain cycles through these states in roughly 90-minute cycles. You descend from alpha through theta into delta, then back up through theta into REM, then lighten into alpha and light sleep before either waking or cycling down again. The circadian nadir, 2:04 am, is when your sleep drive is highest and your delta sleep is deepest. But if you wake during this window, something unique happens. Your prefrontal cortex, the executive control center, responsible for planning, inhibition, and logical analysis, is still largely offline. It takes 20 to 30 minutes to fully activate after waking. But your default mode network, the system responsible for self-referential thinking, memory processing, and mind wandering, activates immediately. And your brain is still producing predominantly theta waves, even though you're behaviorally awake. This creates what researchers call hypnagogic wakefulness. You're conscious, but you're in a brainwave state that's normally associated with deep meditation or the edge of sleep. This is the state that every contemplative tradition has tried to access through technique. Yogic samadhi, Zen satori, Sufi fana, Christian theoria. These are all descriptions of consciousness in a theta-dominant state while maintaining metacognitive awareness. The Desert Fathers didn't have EEG machines, but they recognized this state experientially, and they recognized that the 3 a.m. awakening was a natural gateway to it. What you're doing with the breathwork and the postural alignment is stabilizing this state. You're keeping yourself in theta without falling back into delta sleep, and you're activating enough of your prefrontal cortex through the metacognitive task of watching and labeling thoughts to maintain awareness. The coherent breathing at 5-6 breaths per minute adds another layer. Research by Richard Gevirtz and Paul Lehrer on heart rate variability training shows that this breathing pattern increases vagal tone, which has downstream effects on the amygdala, your brain's threat detection center. When vagal tone is high, the amygdala is less reactive. This means that thoughts and emotions that would normally trigger a stress response, fear, anxiety, agitation, don't grab you as strongly. You can observe them with more equanimity. This is what the texts describe as passionlessness, or apatheia, not the absence of feeling but the ability to experience thoughts and emotions without being controlled by them. From a neuroscience perspective, you're doing 3 things simultaneously. First, maintaining theta-dominant brainwave activity through the natural 3 a.m. circadian nadir. Second, training metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own mental processes, which activates the prefrontal cortex in a specific way that doesn't disrupt theta. Third, regulating your autonomic nervous system through coherent breathing, which reduces amygdala reactivity and increases your capacity to stay present with difficult thoughts and emotions. The result is a state that's simultaneously deeply relaxed and acutely aware, exactly what the contemplative traditions describe as the goal. Chronobiology is the study of biological rhythms, how our physiology changes across 24-hour cycles. Every system in your body operates on a circadian rhythm regulated by what's called your master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus in your hypothalamus. This clock is synchronized primarily by light exposure, but also by food intake, temperature, and behavior. Here's what happens during the circadian nadir at 3 a.m. Core body temperature is at its lowest, about 1-2 degrees Fahrenheit below your daytime average. This matters because lower body temperature is associated with reduced metabolic activity and increased parasympathetic dominance. Melatonin is at peak concentration. Melatonin isn't just a sleep hormone, it's also a powerful antioxidant and has been shown to modulate neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural connections. Cortisol begins its morning rise. Your cortisol rhythm typically bottoms out around 2-3 a.m., then begins to climb, reaching peak around 8-9 a.m. If you wake at 3 a.m., you're catching the very beginning of this rise, enough to support wakefulness, not enough to create stress. The default mode network is most active. Research by Marcus Rachel at Washington University shows that the DMN is most active during early morning hours and during states of low metabolic demand. From a chronobiological perspective, 3 a.m. is the optimal time for practices that require low sympathetic activation, high parasympathetic tone, access to unconscious material through theta brain state and active DMN, and neuroplastic potential through high melatonin. Every contemplative tradition independently discovered this, The Islamic tradition has tahajjud, the nighttime prayer performed in the last third of the night. The Hindu tradition has Brahma Muhurta, the 90 minutes before sunrise considered optimal for meditation. The Buddhist tradition has the 3 watches of the night. The Christian tradition has vigils. They're all pointing to the same chronobiological window. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Are Archons real? The Gnostic texts describe Archons as semi-autonomous entities that exist in a realm between spirit and matter, feeding on human emotional energy and keeping souls trapped in ignorance through false thoughts. You can take this literally if you want, or you can read it as sophisticated phenomenological psychology. Here's what we know experientially. There are thoughts that arise in consciousness that don't feel like your thoughts. They have an intrusive, alien quality. They repeat obsessively. They create emotional agitation, and they seem to have a self-preserving quality. When you try to let them go, they come back stronger. Cognitive psychology calls these automatic thoughts, or cognitive distortions. In OCD, they're called intrusive thoughts. In PTSD, they're called traumatic cognitions. The Gnostics called them archontic thoughts. The advantage of the Gnostic framework is that it encourages you to treat these thoughts as external rather than as you. This is exactly what modern ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy teaches. Cognitive diffusion, the ability to separate yourself from your thoughts. When you think I am anxious, you're identified with the anxiety. When you think I'm having a thought that I'm anxious, you've created space. The Gnostic framework goes further. An Archon is producing the thought of anxiety in my mind. Even more space. Is it literally true that there's an external entity creating the thought? That's a metaphysical question I can't answer. What I can tell you is that treating repetitive, agitating thoughts as external and deliberately withdrawing attention from them is therapeutically effective. Multiple studies on metacognitive therapy and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy show that this approach, observing thoughts without identifying with them, reduces depression, anxiety, and rumination more effectively than trying to change the content of thoughts. The Desert Fathers figured this out 1700 years ago. They noticed that fighting thoughts directly doesn't work. Evagrius wrote, "Do not try to argue with the thought, for this only strengthens it. Instead, you observe the thought, recognize its source, this is a demonic thought, and redirect attention. Whether you call this a demonic thought, an automatic thought, or default mode network activation doesn't change the phenomenology or the technique. The practice works the same way. Now let me show you the advanced applications and common obstacles. After 3-6 months of consistent practice, you'll start to encounter both advanced possibilities and specific obstacles. One of the most commonly reported experiences among long-term practitioners is what happens when you do the practice and then return to sleep. The continued awareness you've cultivated carries over into the dream state, producing what modern sleep research calls lucid dreaming, dreams in which you know you're dreaming and can sometimes direct the dream content. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition has an entire practice system around this called dream yoga, described in texts like The Yoga of the Dream State by Chogyal Namkhai Norbu. But the Christian tradition also knew about this. In the Lorsiak history, written by Palladius around 419 CE, there are accounts of desert fathers who could pray even in their sleep, and who received visions and revelations during dreams. What's actually happening is that the metacognitive awareness you're training during the 3 a.m. practice, the ability to observe mental phenomena without identification, persists as you return to sleep. During REM sleep, when most vivid dreaming occurs, this awareness can activate, and you suddenly realize I'm dreaming while the dream is happening. This isn't the goal of the practice, but it's a common side effect. If it happens, you can use it as an extension of the practice. Observe the dream with the same quality of attention you bring to waking thoughts. The text suggests that this dream awareness is valuable because it demonstrates that the watchfulness can become continuous, present not just during formal practice, but throughout all states of consciousness. After months of practice, many practitioners report a specific phenomenon. During the 3 a.m. practice, after 15 to 20 minutes of breath focus and thought labeling, sudden insights arise, complete ideas, solutions to long-standing problems, creative breakthroughs, or what the texts call revelations. These aren't the result of logical thinking. They arise spontaneously, fully formed, with a quality of clarity and certainty. Neuroscience research on the default mode network suggests a mechanism. The DMN is responsible for what's called spontaneous cognition, the brain's background processing that connects disparate information and generates novel insights. When you're in normal waking consciousness, your executive network, your prefrontal cortex, is dominant and it suppresses DMN activity. But in the 3 a.m. theta state, with the executive network still coming online, the DMN can be active while you're also metacognitively aware. This creates a unique window where unconscious processing can surface into conscious awareness without the immediate censorship of the executive network. The texts describe this as the thoughts from the nous, or divine thoughts. Modern creativity research calls it spontaneous insight, or the eureka moment. If you experience this, the instruction is simple. Receive the insight, acknowledge it, maybe mentally note it if it's important, then return to the breath. Don't immediately start thinking about the insight, planning how to implement it, or getting excited about it. That activates the executive network and collapses the state. When you're done with the practice, then you can journal about the insight or work with it. But during the practice, treat it like any other thought. Observe, acknowledge, return to breath. A significant number of practitioners, usually after 2 to 3 months of consistent practice, report experiences of intense physical sensation during the 3 a.m. practice. Heat, tingling, pressure, vibration, or what some traditions call kriyas, spontaneous movements or sounds. The Eastern Orthodox texts describe this as the energies of prayer. The yogic traditions describe it as kundalini awakening. The Gnostic texts don't address it directly, but later Christian mystics like Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross describe intense somatic experiences during deep prayer. From a neuroscience perspective, we don't have a complete explanation for these phenomena. Some researchers suggest they're related to parasympathetic activation and changes in interoception, your perception of internal bodily states. Others point to the release of suppressed trauma stored in the body. Whatever the mechanism, the instruction is the same. Observe the sensations without trying to intensify them or make them go away. Apply the same quality of attention you bring to thoughts. If the sensations become overwhelming or frightening, open your eyes, stand up, move slowly, and ground yourself in external sensory experience. This isn't a practice of pushing through or forcing, it's a practice of observation and allowing. Over time, these intense experiences usually stabilize. What remains is a subtle but persistent sense of internal aliveness or presence that practitioners describe as deeply nourishing. After 4-8 weeks of consistent practice, many people hit a wall. The practice that felt powerful and transformative suddenly feels dry, mechanical, or even aversive. The 3 a.m. awakening that you were approaching with interest now feels like a burden. The Desert Fathers called this acedia, the noonday demon. It's what we'd now call practitioner burnout or meditation fatigue. Evagrius's instruction: when acedia comes, do not abandon your cell. Do not flee the struggle, but also vary the practice. If breath focus feels dead, shift to sound awareness, listening to the ambient sounds in your environment with the same quality of attention. If sitting feels like torture, try slow walking meditation for 10 minutes before sitting. The key insight is that acedia isn't a sign that the practice isn't working. It's a sign that you've habituated to the novelty, and now the actual work begins. Continuing the practice not because it feels good or produces interesting experiences, but because it's the discipline you've committed to. This is where most people quit. The texts are very clear about this. The demon of acedia's primary weapon is to make you believe the practice is pointless, and you should try something else, somewhere else. Push through. It passes. Some practitioners become so enthusiastic about the 3 a.m. practice that they start sleeping poorly overall, staying up late to practice, waking multiple times per night, or deliberately fragmenting their sleep. This is a mistake. The practice depends on you being well rested overall. If you're chronically sleep deprived, you won't have the cognitive resources to maintain attention, and you'll be more susceptible to the very thought patterns you're trying to observe clearly. The Desert Fathers practiced within a container of 7 to 8 hours of total sleep per 24 hours. They napped during the day, had an early bedtime, and protected their sleep hygiene rigorously. If you're waking naturally at 3 a.m. more than 3-4 times per week, and it's starting to impact your daytime functioning, You might need to adjust. Either practice on only 2-3 nights per week, or return to sleep more quickly after a shorter practice. The goal is sustainable practice, not heroic asceticism. After some weeks of practice, and especially after powerful experiences, there's a tendency to start building elaborate theories about what's happening. You've activated your Merkaba, you're ascending to 5D consciousness, you've defeated the Archons. This is what the texts call vainglory, and what modern teachers call spiritual bypassing. The antidote is to keep the practice simple and phenomenological. What are you actually experiencing? Not what you think it means, not what framework you're interpreting it through, but what are the actual raw experiences? Breath sensations, thoughts arising and passing, moments of stillness, insights, emotions. That's it. You can use conceptual frameworks as maps, the Gnostic cosmology, the neuroscience, the chronobiology, but don't mistake the map for the territory. The practice is what you do. Everything else is commentary. Now let's talk about how to actually integrate this into your life in a sustainable way. What to expect over the first 30 days, and how to troubleshoot the most common problems. For the first 2 weeks, your only goal is to establish a consistent response when you wake at 3 a.m. Don't worry about the quality of the practice. Don't worry about how long you sit. Don't worry about achieving any particular state. Just do this. When you wake at 3 a.m., sit up and take 10 slow breaths. That's it. Count to 10 breaths, then do whatever you want, go back to sleep, get up, whatever. You're establishing a conditioned response. 3 a.m. awakening equals sit up and breathe. Track this in a simple journal. Note the date, what time you woke, and whether you did the 10 breaths. Nothing else. Most people will wake naturally at 3 a.m. 3 to 5 times during these 2 weeks. If you wake less frequently, that's fine. If you wake more frequently, only practice on alternate nights. You don't want to create sleep deprivation. Once the sit-up and breathe response feels automatic, extend the practice. Sit for 5 minutes. Use a timer if you need to. During these 5 minutes, practice only breath awareness. No thought labeling yet. Just try to keep your attention on the sensations of breathing, and every time you notice you've drifted into thinking, gently return to the breath. Don't count how many times you drift. Don't judge yourself. Just return. Journal. Note the date, time you woke, how long you practiced, and one word describing how it felt. Calm, restless, sleepy, clear, whatever comes. You're building capacity. 5 minutes of sustained attention at 3 a.m. is challenging. Most people's attention span in normal waking consciousness is 8 to 12 minutes before mind wandering. At 3 a.m. with a sleepy prefrontal cortex, it's more like 3-5 minutes. So if you can maintain attention for even 30 seconds at a time during these 5 minutes, you're doing well. Now extend to 10 minutes and add the thought labeling component. When you notice you've been thinking, label the category of thought before returning to breath. Use simple labels: planning, remembering, worrying, fantasy, judging. Don't analyze the thought. Don't get interested in the content. Just label and return. Journal. Note practice details plus list the 3 to 5 most common thought categories that appeared. You're starting to see patterns. Most people discover that 70-80% of their nighttime thoughts fall into 2 or 3 categories. For some it's planning and worrying. For others it's remembering and fantasy. For others it's judging and comparing. These are your demons, your habitual thought patterns, the grooves your mind automatically falls into. Just seeing them clearly is transformative. You begin to recognize them faster, and they begin to lose some of their compelling power. By week 7 or 8, most people hit their first major resistance. The practice feels tedious, you're not waking as frequently, or when you do wake, you really don't want to practice. This is normal. This is where the discipline is tested. Here's what to do. Lower the bar. Go back to just 5 minutes, or even go back to 10 breaths. The goal is to maintain the container, to keep the practice alive even in minimal form, rather than to push through with heroic effort and then burn out and quit. Journal. Note your resistance honestly. Write about what makes you not want to practice, what the thoughts are saying, what you're feeling. Often the resistance itself is instructive. It's revealing something. Maybe you're pushing too hard. Maybe you're afraid of what you might discover. Maybe you're attached to having certain experiences. Work with the resistance the same way you work with thoughts during the practice. Observe it, label it, don't fight it, but also don't let it determine your behavior. You can feel resistant and still do 5 minutes of practice. If you've made it to week 9, you're past the initial resistance and entering the phase where the practice starts to stabilize. Extend to 15-20 minutes. Add the thought discrimination practice, learning to distinguish between archontic thoughts that are grabbing and agitating and thoughts from the news that are clear and spacious. By this point, most practitioners report faster recognition of mind wandering, within 2-3 seconds instead of 30-60 seconds. Longer periods of continuous attention on breath, 30-60 seconds at a time. Reduced emotional charge around thoughts. They arise but don't hook you as strongly. Occasional moments of genuine stillness, gaps between thoughts, where there's just presence. Improved daytime mood and emotional regulation. Better quality sleep overall, even with the nighttime waking. Journal. In addition to practice details, note any insights or patterns you're discovering, any changes in your daytime life, any dreams that seem significant. Let me share some accounts from people who've worked with this practice. I'm using their words with permission, sometimes lightly edited for clarity. Sarah, 34, marketing consultant, 6 months of practice. The first month was honestly frustrating. I'd sit at 3 a.m. and it felt like I was just thinking about my to-do list for 20 minutes. But somewhere around week 8 something shifted. I started to notice that there was a me who was watching the thoughts about the to-do list. Like there was this quiet observer who was always there underneath the mental chatter. That observer doesn't get stressed, it just watches. And I started to be able to access that perspective during the day. Like in a difficult meeting, I could feel myself getting angry. But I could also feel this part of me that was just watching the anger arise, and that created enough space that I didn't react the way I usually would. The 3 a.m. practice is where I learnt that skill. During the day, my prefrontal cortex is too active. I'm too much in problem-solving mode to see this clearly. But at 3 a.m., with my thinking mind half asleep, the observer is more obvious. Michael, 52, software engineer, 14 months of practice. Around month 3, I started having these experiences during the practice, where my sense of being a separate self would just dissolve. It wasn't scary, it was more like relief. Like I'd been carrying around this heavy sense of me and my problems and my life, and for 30 seconds or a minute it would just drop away and there would just be breathing happening, sensations happening, no one doing it. Then I'd come back to normal consciousness and my thinking mind would try to grasp it, try to figure out what happened, and the thinking itself would contract me back into the separate self feeling. I learned not to chase those experiences. They come when they come. But they've changed my understanding of who I am. Or rather, they've shown me that the who question might not be the right question. Jennifer, 41. Therapist, 3 months of practice. I have a trauma history, and around week 6 of the practice, I started having really intense body sensations, like electrical current running through my arms and legs, heat in my chest. Sometimes my hands would shake. It was frightening at first. I thought something was wrong. But my therapist, who understands somatic work, explained that this was probably suppressed trauma releasing from my body. The stillness of the practice was creating a safe enough container for my nervous system to discharge stored activation. I learned to just let it happen, sit with it, breathe through it, and it did eventually settle. Now I occasionally get those sensations, but they're much gentler, and I recognize them as a sign that my nervous system is completing old stress cycles. The 3 a.m. practice has been therapeutic in a way that years of talk therapy wasn't. It's working at a body level, not just a cognitive level. David, 29, graduate student. 8 months of practice. The most surprising thing for me has been the impact on my creative work. I'm a writer, and I've always struggled with the internal critic. The voice that says everything I write is garbage. During the 3 a.m. practice, I learned to recognize that voice as an archontic thought pattern. It has a specific quality, harsh, condemning, not at all constructive, and I learned to just let it be there without believing it. That skill transferred to my writing. Now when the critic shows up, I can acknowledge it. Okay, there's the critic, and keep writing anyway. The thoughts don't stop me anymore. Plus, I've had some of my best ideas during the practice. There's something about that 3 a.m. state where connections form that wouldn't form during normal waking consciousness. I keep a small notebook by my bed now to jot down ideas after I practice. After interviewing dozens of practitioners who've worked with this for 6 months or longer, Several consistent patterns emerge. The practice gets easier in some ways and harder in others. Easier because your attention stabilizes and you can maintain focus more readily. Harder because you start encountering more subtle layers of resistance and defense. Most people experience at least one dark night phase, a period of 2 to 4 weeks where the practice feels meaningless, where old psychological material surfaces, or where you question whether any of this is worth it. Everyone who pushed through this phase reported that it was transformative on the other side. The benefits are cumulative but not linear. You'll have periods of rapid progress, plateaus, even apparent regression. This is normal in any skill development. The practice changes your relationship to thoughts and emotions in ways that ripple through your entire life. Relationships, work, health behaviors, creative expression. After 6-12 months, most people report that the 3 a.m. waking becomes less frequent naturally. The hypothesis is that once your nervous system has discharged whatever it needed to discharge, once you've worked through whatever was causing the sleep disruption, the awakening isn't necessary anymore. But many practitioners choose to continue with deliberate biphasic sleep, setting an alarm for 3 a.m., because they value the practice. Let me give you a day-by-day roadmap for the first month so you know exactly what to do. Days 1 to 7. When you wake at 3 a.m., sit up and take 10 conscious breaths. Breathe at your natural pace, just count to 10. Notice how you feel afterward. Return to sleep or begin your day. Track. Did I do the 10 breaths? Yes or no? Days, see Satan 14. Sit up and breathe for 5 minutes. Use a timer. Focus on breath sensations at your nose, chest, belly. When attention wanders, gently return. Don't judge yourself for wandering. Track. Minutes practiced. Overall feeling in one word. Days. 15 to 21. Extend to 10 minutes. Add thought labeling. When you notice you've been thinking, name the category. Planning, worrying, whatever it is. Label and return, that's the complete practice. Track, minutes, top 3 thought categories. Days, 22-30. Continue 10 minutes. Begin noticing the quality of thoughts. Grabbing and agitating versus clear and spacious. Practice withdrawing attention from the former, allowing space for the latter. Track, minutes, any insights or patterns noticed. After day 30, assess. Is this feeling sustainable? Too easy? Too difficult? Adjust duration accordingly. Can go up to 20 to 30 minutes or stay at 10. Continue for another 30 days before making major changes. Problem: I keep falling back asleep during the practice. Solution: open your eyes. Practice with eyes open and soft downward gaze. If you still drift, stand for the first 2 minutes of coherent breathing, then sit. Problem: I wake up anxious and agitated, not calm. Solution: this is cortisol pulse hitting early. Before sitting, walk slowly for 2-3 minutes to discharge the activation. Then practice. Also check. Are you drinking caffeine after 2 p.m? That can dysregulate your cortisol rhythm. Problem: my thoughts are so intense I can't even find the breath. Solution: use a more sensory-rich anchor. Instead of breath, focus on the feeling of your hands on your thighs or on the sounds in your environment. You need a stronger anchor until your attention stabilizes. Problem: I'm not waking at 3 a.m. at all. Solution: don't force it. If you're not waking naturally, you can either set an alarm for 3 a.m. 2 to 3 times per week and practice deliberately, or practice the same technique at a different time, early morning before your household wakes, or late evening before bed. Problem: I feel worse after I practice, not better. Solution: you might be pushing too hard or surfacing material faster than you can integrate it. Shorten the practice to 5 minutes. Add more grounding. Feet flat on floor, eyes open, sensory focus. Consider working with a therapist if intense psychological material is arising. Problem: nothing is happening, I'm just sitting there breathing. Solution: this is the practice. There's no particular experience you're supposed to have. The benefits are subtle and cumulative. Trust the process for at least 60-90 days before evaluating whether it's working. Unlike many practices, this one has some concrete markers of progress. Attention stability. In week 1, you might maintain attention on breath for 3-5 seconds before wandering. By week 8, you should be able to maintain for 20-30 seconds. By week 16, 60+ seconds. This is measurable. Recognition speed. How quickly do you notice you've been thinking? Week 1, maybe 30-60 seconds after you drifted. Week 8, 5-10 seconds. Week 16, 2-3 seconds or even immediately. Daytime carryover. Are you starting to recognize thought patterns during the day? Can you access the observer perspective in stressful situations? Sleep quality. Are you sleeping better overall? Falling asleep faster? Waking less frequently? Track with a sleep app if you want objective data. Emotional regulation. Are you less reactive? More able to pause before responding? These are concrete, observable changes. If you're practicing consistently and not seeing any of these after 90 days, something needs to adjust. Either the technique, your life circumstances, or your expectations. The real test of the practice is how it shows up in your daily life. Here are the most common integration points practitioners report. Many people find that after the 3 a.m. practice, they wake for the day with unusual clarity and energy. Use this. Do your most important creative or cognitive work in the early morning. When you notice stress arising during the day, you can drop into 3-5 coherent breaths, same technique you use at 3 a.m. This activates the same calm alert state and short-circuits the stress spiral. Before an important conversation, 2 minutes of the breath practice helps you access the observer perspective. You can be in the conversation, but also watching yourself in the conversation, which dramatically improves your ability to respond skillfully rather than react. Big decisions? Instead of endless pros and cons lists, sit with the question in the early morning hours or during a 3 a.m. practice. Allow the question to rest in the spacious awareness you've cultivated. Often clarity arises without thinking. Many practitioners report that their best creative ideas come during or immediately after the practice. Keep a notebook handy. The practice isn't separate from life. It's training that makes you more skillful at being alive. We're now at the final section. Advanced variations for long-term practitioners, related practices that complement this work, and the long-term trajectory of the path. After 6 to 12 months of consistent practice, with 20-30-minute sessions, some practitioners feel called to go deeper. The extended night watch is 60-90 minutes of continuous practice during the 3 a.m. window. This isn't for everyone. It requires a stable life situation where you can function on biphasic sleep, already having worked through major psychological resistances and genuine calling, not forcing. If you want to try this, go to sleep at 9 p.m., set an alarm for 2:30 a.m. Wake, use the bathroom if needed, then begin the practice. Practice in the same way as the standard protocol, but with one addition. After 20-30 minutes of breath focus and thought labeling, allow the practice to become more receptive. Instead of maintaining tight focus on the breath, soften your attention. Let it become diffuse, spacious, open to whatever arises, sensations, thoughts, images, insights. This is what the Christian contemplatives called contemplation, as opposed to meditation. Meditation is focused attention. Contemplation is receptive awareness. In this receptive state, practitioners report extended periods of 5-10 minutes of thought-free awareness, just silence, presence. Spontaneous insight floods, complete understanding of complex issues, experiences of what the texts call divine union or cosmic consciousness, deep rest that's more restorative than sleep. After 60-90 minutes, return to bed. You'll typically fall back asleep quickly and sleep deeply until 7 to 8 a.m. This is a more active approach for practitioners who are encountering specific, recurring thought patterns that seem particularly resistant. Instead of just labeling and redirecting, you engage the thought pattern directly, but from the observer perspective. When a particularly strong archontic thought arises, a recurring fear, a harsh self-judgment, a compulsive desire, instead of just labeling it, you dialogue with it. You ask, internally or even out loud, what do you want? What need are you trying to meet? What are you protecting me from? This is based on internal family systems therapy and voice dialogue work. The idea is that even destructive thought patterns are trying to serve some protective function, however misguided. By dialoguing with the pattern, you can sometimes discover the underlying need and find healthier ways to meet it. Example: a practitioner kept having recurring thoughts during practice about needing to check her phone, needing to plan her day, feeling like she was wasting time. Instead of just labeling planning thought over and over, she asked, "What do you need?" The answer that arose, "I need to know that you're not going to fail, that you're going to be okay, that you're in control." She recognized this as the voice of anxiety, trying to create certainty in an uncertain world through planning and control. She responded, "I understand. Thank you for trying to protect me, but the constant planning doesn't actually create certainty. It just creates exhaustion. I'm okay right now, in this moment. You can rest." The compulsive quality of the thoughts diminished significantly after this dialogue. This is advanced work. It requires that you can maintain the observer perspective while also engaging empathically with thought patterns. If you're new to the practice, stick with simple labeling and redirection. Some practitioners integrate body scan meditation with the breath focus. After 10-15 minutes of breath awareness, you systematically move attention through your body: feet, legs, pelvis, torso, arms, hands, neck, head, spending 30-60 seconds with each region, observing sensations without judgment. This practice surfaces somatic holding patterns, places where you're unconsciously tensing or armoring, and allows them to release. The Desert Fathers didn't explicitly teach body scan, but they were aware of what they called passions being stored in the body. Evagrius wrote about the connection between physical posture, breath, and mental states. Modern trauma therapy, especially somatic experiencing and EMDR, confirms that traumatic memories and stress responses are stored somatically, not just cognitively. The body scan during the 3 a.m. practice can be profoundly releasing because you're in a parasympathetic dominant state, your defenses are down, and your body is more willing to let go of chronic holding patterns. The 3 a.m. protocol is powerful on its own, but it's even more powerful in combination with other practices. Even 10 minutes of meditation in the morning or evening will accelerate your progress with the 3 a.m. practice, the skills transfer. Many practitioners do 10 to 20 minutes of sitting meditation each morning, and then the 3 a.m. practice when they wake naturally. Writing about your practice, your insights, your resistance, and your patterns helps consolidate learning and reveals trends you might not otherwise notice. Reading the actual source texts, the Philokalia, the Practicos, the Nag Hammadi texts, deepens your understanding and connects you to the lineage of practitioners. Even if you're not religious, these texts are masterworks of consciousness exploration. Yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, or any embodied practice that cultivates interoceptive awareness complements this beautifully. The 3 a.m. practice is primarily attentional and cognitive. Body practices balance it with somatic intelligence. The Desert Fathers lived in the desert not just for asceticism, but because the vast, relatively unchanging landscape supports certain states of consciousness. Regular time in nature, hiking, sitting by water, being in silence, supports the same quality of spacious awareness you cultivate at 3 a.m. If possible, find or create a practice community. Even meeting monthly with 2 to 3 other people who are working with these practices provides accountability, inspiration, and the opportunity to share experiences. The monastic communities existed for good reasons. Sustained practice is easier with support. I want to give you a realistic picture of what long-term practice looks like, based on my own experience and interviews with practitioners who've been at this for years. The first 6 months are about establishing the practice and working through initial resistance. You're learning the basic techniques, encountering your habitual patterns, and building capacity for sustained attention. Most people experience periods of enthusiasm alternating with periods of resistance, significant improvement in attention stability and thought recognition, some insights into habitual patterns, variable impacts on sleep quality, sometimes better, sometimes disrupted, and curiosity about whether it's working. This phase is about commitment and consistency, not about having profound experiences. In the second 6 months, the practice starts to stabilize and integrate. You're no longer questioning whether to practice. It's just what you do when you wake at 3 a.m. The quality of attention deepens. What took 20 minutes to settle into now happens in 5 to 10 minutes. Insights arise more frequently and with more clarity. The boundaries between practice time and regular life start to blur. You notice yourself using the same quality of awareness during daily activities. Common experiences, at least one dark night phase where old material surfaces, occasional profound experiences of stillness or insight or unity, notable improvements in daytime emotional regulation and stress resilience, changes in relationships, you're less reactive, more present, and questions about identity and purpose may arise as you recognize thought patterns you've been identified with. After the first year, the practice continues to deepen. but the changes become more subtle and harder to articulate. You're not having dramatic experiences as frequently, but your baseline state has shifted. You're more often in a state of what the texts call remembrance, present, aware, not lost in thought. The 3 a.m. awakening may become less frequent. Some practitioners naturally shift to different sleep patterns. Others deliberately maintain biphasic sleep because they value the practice. Many practitioners at this stage begin to explore related practices, dream yoga, energy work, advanced contemplative states. Or they deepen their engagement with a specific tradition like Christian mysticism, Buddhism, or Sufism. Common experiences, sense of having graduated from certain psychological patterns that used to dominate, increased capacity for what the texts call bearing suffering, being with difficulty without resistance, moments of what can only be called grace or blessing, experiences of profound connection, love, or meaning that arise spontaneously, questions about purpose like, what is this practice for? Where is it leading? And some practitioners feel called to teach or share, while others feel called to simply live it. After 3 years of consistent practice, practitioners report that it's no longer something they do, it's more like who they are. The observer awareness that you cultivated during thousands of hours at 3 a.m. is now background present throughout the day. You still practice, but the practice has become effortless. It's no longer discipline, it's delight. The texts call this unceasing prayer or continuous remembrance. Modern psychology might call it sustained metacognitive awareness or dispositional mindfulness. What it feels like, you're living your life, working, relating, eating, sleeping, but there's a quality of awareness present that wasn't there before. You're both in your life and watching your life simultaneously, but not in a dissociated way. More like you're both the actor and the audience, fully committed to the role, but knowing it's a role. Practitioners at this stage often become less interested in experiences and more interested in service. How can this understanding help others? How can it be lived in the world? Some become teachers, some become activists. Some remain quiet practitioners who simply radiate a quality of presence that impacts everyone around them. The practice hasn't ended, it's just changed form. If you want to go deeper with this practice, here are resources. Primary texts, the Practicos, and Chapters on Prayer by Evagrius Ponticus, 4th century, available in modern translation by John Bamberger. The Philokalia, multi-volume collection compiled 4th-15th centuries, start with Volume 1. The Nag Hammadi Library in English, especially the Apocryphon of John and the Gospel of Thomas. The Sayings of the Desert Fathers, translated by Benedicta Ward. Modern interpreters, Thoughts Matter, The Practice of the Spiritual Life, by Mary Margaret Funk, which integrates Evagrius with modern psychology. The Gnostic Gospels by Elaine Pagels, scholarly but accessible introduction to Gnostic thought. The Cloud of Unknowing, 14th century anonymous English text on contemplative prayer. Neuroscience and Sleep, Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. Understand the science of circadian rhythms and sleep architecture. Altered Traits by Daniel Goleman and Richard Davidson. Research on long-term meditation effects. Online communities. Look for contemplative practice groups in your area. Many churches, meditation centers, and spiritual communities offer sitting groups. Reddit's meditation and stream entry communities have active discussions of these practices. The World Community for Christian Meditation offers online resources and local groups. Teachers and Traditions. If the Christian framework resonates, explore Centering Prayer through Thomas Keating or the World Community for Christian Meditation through John Main. If the Buddhist framework resonates, explore Insight Meditation Society or Spirit Rock. If the non-denominational approach resonates, explore secular mindfulness through MBSR. Mindfulness-based stress reduction. The key is to find support. This path is walked by many. You don't have to do it alone. We're at the end of this video and I want to close with what might be the most important thing I can tell you. This practice, the 3 a.m. threshold protocol, is a technique. It's a set of instructions for working with attention, breath, and thought during a specific circadian window. But the practice is pointing to something beyond technique. The Desert Fathers didn't wake at 3 a.m. to follow a method. They woke at 3 a.m. because they were in love with God, with truth, with the deep silence that holds all things. The Gnostics didn't train themselves to recognize archontic thoughts because they were trying to optimize their psychology. They did it because they were seeking gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of reality. The technique is a doorway. What's on the other side of the door isn't another technique. It's life itself, experienced directly, without the constant mediation of the chattering mind. You might practice for months or years and never have a single dramatic experience, or you might have profound experiences in your first week. Neither scenario is better or worse. What matters is whether the practice is making you more alive, more present, more capable of love, more able to bear the suffering and beauty of existence without collapsing into numbness or reactivity. If it is, keep practicing. If it's not, adjust or try something else. The texts are clear about this. Techniques are means, not ends. In the Philokalia, Nikephoros the Solitary writes, "The aim of the spiritual life is the acquisition of the Holy Spirit, which we might translate as the cultivation of spacious presence. Everything else, the postures, the breathing patterns, the thought labeling, is scaffolding. Necessary at first, gradually releasing as you learn to stand in the space without support. Your next step is simple. Try it, not because I've convinced you with evidence or authority, but because some part of you recognized something true in what you've heard today." The 3 a.m. awakening that disrupts your sleep might be the most valuable hour of your day, not because it's mystically special, but because you're going to learn to meet it with awareness instead of resistance. Start tonight. If you wake at 3 a.m., sit up and take 10 conscious breaths. That's all. Then tomorrow, watch this video again or review the written version I'll link in the description and start building the practice over 30 days. After 30 days, assess. Is this serving you? If yes, continue. If no, adjust or stop. And if you want to share your experience, the genuine experience, not the performance of experience, I'd be honored to hear it. The comment section below is a space for real sharing, not for proving anything or performing spirituality. What are you actually experiencing? What's working? What's confusing? What questions do you have? That's the conversation I want to have. Thank you for your attention for these 2 hours. If you found value here, the best thing you can do is practice and then share this with someone who might benefit. May your practice be fruitful. May your 3 a.m. awakenings become gateways rather than burdens. And may you discover in the silence between thoughts the presence that was always there waiting.